This podcast is proud to be part of the TalkSport Fan Network. TalkSport. Powered by fans.
Danilo's free. He goes to Gibbs wide. Edge of the box for Ole. Yes! Great goal! What a hit from Ole! Gibbs wide. They've only gone and done it again. Forest back in the lead. Through Morgan Gibbs White. Oh, and he scores! And the City ground goes ballistic.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Red Side of the Trent as Forest welcome Newcastle United looking for a fourth straight league win. Here to give us the Newcastle insight is John Lane of the True Faith Newcastle United podcast, who joined us earlier in the season to talk about Elliot Anderson and his magical ability. John, how are you first of all?
Yeah, really good. Much happier after the weekend, and I think we're just coming to form at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the game at the weekend. Obviously, I watched it actually just before Forest played West Ham, 1-0 win over Arsenal, and you were pretty good value for the 3 points there. What did you think of the game from your perspective?
We've had some real issues this year. We started off the first few games where we couldn't get performances right, but then the results came, so it was all right for a little bit. And then we had a period of time when actually the performances were much better, but then the results weren't there. So finally, Wednesday night I think was probably the turning point for us. And it's the League Cup. I think we made about 4 or 5 changes, something like that. But I think that was the game where Eddie Howe realised that actually he's got other options, or at least he kind of used other options that he had. So and we carried some of those into Saturday. So Joe Willock and Joe Linton down the left hand side. Working really well together. I thought Michael Richards' analysis and match of the day of that was pretty good, talking about Hall and Willock and Joe Linton and how they all kind of work together and you want 2s and 3s across the pitch, don't you? Which work in tandem together, and that's been a big part of our success in the last week or so. But this time last week, it was like a disaster. We'd lost at Chelsea, and it's like, well, where's the next result going to come from? And so I think we are on a bit of a tide of momentum, but I think we're also very aware that, Nottingham Forest have done incredibly well this season. We've got some fantastic results, sitting, you're third in the league? So, you guys at the moment are probably in dreamland, but, at the same time, it is a long season, but, you have to get yourself up there to have a chance of staying up there, and it's about how you maintain that, isn't it?
Yeah, the oxygen tank kind of supply is getting in demand because we're getting a nosebleed getting so high up in the league. I mean, I was really surprised because it was the first win in 5 in the league for Newcastle. Obviously, started off the season brilliantly, winning I think 3 of your first 4 games before that bit of dip in form. What you talked about, those sort of changes that Eddie Howe's made. I know you've had a lot of injuries as well, but what were those kind of tweaks? Because obviously Anthony Gordon played right hand side, and it was a brilliant cross for Alexander Isak. I heard Shearer on the is it The Rest is Football podcast?
Rest is Football, yeah.
Yeah, and he was basically saying like that's the type of cross he'd have loved, obviously at the Gallagher end, and he would have just I think the net would have come off if Shearer's head in that kind of thing. I mean, yeah, kind of talk about those little tweaks then that you mentioned.
So we've been playing 4-3-3 for the last 2.5, 3 years. That's been the system we've gone to. The big change that Eddie Howe when he came was that he wanted a back 4. It was quite clear that he wanted a back 4. Bruce prior to that was playing a back 5 because he was telling us that the certain players couldn't play unless it was in a back 5. Fabian Schär being one of them, who has been a mainstay in Eddie Howe's side since he came in. He was the only player that was on international duty that week that went straight into the 11 that first game. Well, we played Brentford at St James's. So Schär's been really, really important to that. But that 4-3-3, obviously, as the personnel has changed, has obviously developed over time. And this year, at the start of the year, you had a front 3 of Gordon, Isak, and it's been Jacob Murphy most of the time. Now, Jacob Murphy, I think, is, if you compare to kind of where he was when Eddie Howe joined the club and where he is now, he's definitely come on as a player, but he's definitely not at the same level as Anthony Gordon or Isak or Harvey Barnes or or even Joe Linton on that left hand side. So look, I think there's been a bit of frustration there from the fan base that you've got players like Jacob Murphy who are still getting a game because he isn't at that level of a side that wants to be. We all want to compete to be in the Champions League. That's ultimately if we don't do that, we're going to lose Isak, we're going to lose Gordon, we're going to lose Bruno, those kind of players. So if you want to build that success, and that does make it very hard because he hasn't been backed in the transfer market. We have to be honest about that. So it's about kind of how you push on from there. So the first big change he made is he switched Gordon over to the right and he moved Joe Linton to the left. And I think the reason he did that is because he wanted Joe Linton and Joe Willock to work down the left-hand side, which had worked really well in the 22-23 season when we qualified for the Champions League. There's a assist against Spurs, the game when we beat them 6-1, but we went 5-0 up in like less than 20 minutes.
I remember watching it.
Yeah, the that assist from Joe Willock from the left-hand side just shows you the kind of the quality that he can deliver when he's on form. But him and Joe Linton that season, there was a few times when they were in that kind of almost they'd switch over as well a little bit as well, the kind of dovetail. And it was quite nice to see that back. The other thing that made a massive difference on Saturday was Sean Longstaff. Now, again, probably a player that gets dug out straight away if we don't win. It's like, well, how come he's still playing? I think it sometimes becomes easy to dig out a local lad a bit as well. It's really easy to kind of target them and say that, oh, well, because they're not someone that we brought in for 40, 50, 60 million, then they shouldn't be in the side. And like, if you're playing well enough, you're good enough, right? And surely what we want. And it was quite heartbreaking in a lot of ways to lose Elliot Anderson in the summer because we knew we had a good player there. But we couldn't fit him into the side. And I think I said that to you at the time, I also said to you that he's probably, better at number 10 and he's not played there for all year. So shows what I know and how much more Nuno knows about football than I do. But, you don't want to lose like your local talent in that way. But I think we're also realistic that in this age of PSR, where, you sell an academy product and it's pure profit, that it's likely that, at some point he will go. But, and we're aware that if he does go, he's not going to go to a top 6 side. So he knows that to stay and to continue on the journey, he's going to have to pull out some performances. And I think the one thing that Sean Longstaff did on Saturday and he did on Wednesday night is he did the ugly stuff really well to make it easier for the likes of Bruno and Joe Willock to do what they wanted to do. Now, the big talking point was the fact that Sandro Tonali wasn't the starting 11. And I tell you, there were pitchforks out before the game. Ready just in case the result wasn't there and everyone had something to blame. Why would you play Longstaff ahead of Tonali? And Longstaff showed why. I think Tonali probably looks better in that 6th position that Bruno plays at the minute. So the question you've got to ask yourself is how do you get them into the starting 11 together? It's quite difficult, but actually having someone of the quality of Sandro Tonali just to be able to bring off the bench or Harvey Barnes to come off the bench. I mean, they've been the main changes. And, when we look at the back four, Livramento had started the season with Hall playing the left side as well. And then there'd been some alternation. So Kelly had come in for a couple of games at left back, but Hall's made the left back jersey his quite comprehensively. Tino hasn't done the same on the right-hand side, which is kind of what I think we'd expected him just to kind of start, and then that would be him. But, I mean, you'll remember Trippier played for us at right back when we played in the League Cup at the City ground, and I think he was quite comfortably performed better than what Livramento had previous to that, and Trippier won his side. He's like start back in the Premier League, and then he's got injured, but it's a really good opportunity for Livramento to come in and do a job. So there have been some changes. But I think overall, I think they've been really positive changes.
Yeah, I mean, the two things I picked up from what you just said there, Longstaff and Ryan Yates are so similar in terms of. I've always wondered this actually. I've never really asked other Premier League fans of other football clubs whether you give the treatment to the local lads the same as what we do to Ryan Yates. Ryan Yates is like a very, very Marmite kind of player in our fan base where you've got the half that like love him because he's a Nottingham kind of lad through and through, although he's technically from Lincoln, but he's come through our academy, and then and love him no matter what because of his endeavour. And then you've got the other side who want to see footballing ability, and he never like really showed it. But then since every single new manager, he seems to just get better and better, and you you keep kind of writing him off, and then he comes back with a vengeance. And this season he's been terrific. So it's the battle of the local lads, I guess, on Sunday there in the middle of the park. But yeah, and then Elliot Anderson has actually played in the number 10 role 2 games, and we won both of them. So he's been brilliant for us, and we'll probably I'm sure we'll talk about that more on your guys' podcast and maybe on this one a little bit. But I also wanted to anchor into another point that you had about your summer transfer window. Obviously, we spoke earlier in the summer about the PSR gymnastics of Anderson and Vlachodimos, but the 2 key things were you missed out on Mark Gurhey, first of all, and every time I've watched him play for Palace, other than at the weekend when he scored, he's looked absolutely miserable. And then obviously he had a late bid for Anthony Elanga off ourselves, rejected. I think was far too late in the window for ever that deal to be ever discussed, even, never mind like kind of bashed out. But what have you made of that, and how disappointed have like Newcastle fans been with the transfer window, because you've not really been able to spend at all, really? Are you really brought in like Lloyd Kelly and a couple of others, I believe?
Yeah, so we brought Lloyd Kelly in on a free. We made Lewis Hall's position permanent. So he had been on loan, and now I think we've signed him for like 28 million over like a 5-year period. Of course, we've got our record goalkeeper, £20 million goalkeeper in Odysseus Vlachodimos, who's not really been able to get anywhere near the side. He came on as a substitute during the League Cup game. I think Dubravka got injured against Wimbledon, and then Vlachodimos came on. Or I can't remember. There was some change that had been made there. It might have been Pope. I can't even remember. But we won the game. That was the main thing. But you can tell it was a really eventful game. And yeah, so I mean, I think that part of it was disappointing. We also spent, I think it's 10 million with an optional 5 on William Asula. So we got him from Sheffield United. And, he is a third choice striker. And I suppose some of the other criticism that's been coming the manager's way is, if you bring him on for 5 minutes at the end of a Premier League game, what impact can he actually have? And why we spent this like money on him if we're not going to kind of give him like 15, 20 minutes? If something's not working, we not take someone off and maybe try like a 4-4-2 or something different. To give him a chance, because actually, he started against Wimbledon, and I know it's Wimbledon, but he looked sharp. There was a couple of chances he had. He hit the post against Arsenal at the weekend as well. So, I think it is the frustrating bit is there's been 2 positions that we've wanted to strengthen for the last 3 windows, and that's been right centre half, which would have been Gahey, and right winger, which I don't really know if that was a bit of a throwaway bid at the end of the window, a bit of a desperation bid. But those talks that we'd show an interest in Elise, but there's players that we show interest in, but we kind of know we're not going to get. But I think it, and I mean this in the nicest way. I'm not saying that the club go in and say, well, we'll make it look like, because I don't think it's that at all. But I think it just shows you kind of the level that we're trying to operate at. And it's hard because, with someone like Michael Elise, who's a great talent, Bayern Munich come in for him, like we haven't got a cat and hell's chance. Like we haven't, because what Bayern Munich can offer is, apart from when Harry Kane's now signed for them, usually a Bundesliga and certainly competitive in the Champions League. Now they're definitely competitive in the Champions League this year. I couldn't tell you where what the Bundesliga looks like off the top of my head.
But buying the top by 3 points.
There we go. So, so there's of course, there'll always be in a title race, won't there? There's always going to be that chance. And they're one of the biggest clubs in Europe. So we're not competing with that yet. And we can't compete with that yet because, we've been, in the last 20 years, we've been in the Champions League once. We've been in Europe like twice in the last 10 years. There's still a long journey to go. And I think we're getting to that part of the journey. I think the first couple of years was really exciting. We should have got relegated the year that Howe joined. He manages to drag up to 11th. We were 1 place off finishing in the top 10 that year, which when you look back is remarkable. We then finished in the top 4 the following year. And then last year, after the worst injury crisis, that I can never remember in my living memory, we finished 7th. And I think only once in the last 10 years has a side finished in 7th, not qualified for Europe.
Yeah.
And who would have backed Man United to beat Man City in the cup final? I don't think many of us. So these things happen. We ended up where we were, but the issue is that and I don't need to talk to you guys about PSR and the impact that can have on your club, but that's the challenge we had, and that's why we had to do that ridiculous, Anderson for Vlachodimos transfer. That's why we I think we had to sign Yankuba Minter, who's a right winger, and we needed a right winger. And he's been starting for Brighton. Brighton don't spend 30 odd million on a right winger unless they think he's decent. Let's be honest. They're very good at spending their money and they get it right. So, he's clearly a talent. But the fact that we put ourselves in that position where we had and I'm sorry to sound like a politician here, we had 60 million black hole to fill. And we had to do that. And then I think we also finalized Dan Ashworth's compensation in that period of time as well. So we had to do all those things just to make sure that we didn't fall foul of the rules. And the owners have come out and said, or the chief execs come out and said, well, we've managed to do that. We should now be able to manage it from here. And I think if we're going after players for 60, 70 million in the summer, there must be money there that we can spend. I think there was just a lot of change in the summer. So I think once we had the mini transfer deadline day, which obviously we discussed previously, you then had actual, 1 or 2 months when Paul Mitchell's meant to be pulling the strings. And I think there's clearly some, just some logistical issues around that. And I think you've got to judge Paul Mitchell on the next window, not the last one, I think. But it was very disappointing from a Newcastle fan's point of view to think we haven't strengthened either of the two positions that we needed to strengthen. But the fact that we are only 3 points off the top 5 or whatever it is a credit to her, really, given the fact that there hasn't been that investment. And as I said before, we looked a little bit like that team of 22-23 on Saturday. We had that nastiness back, we had that passion back, and we need to be able to do that away from home as well.
Yeah, I mean, do you kind of worry about that injury record you've got? Because it seems like, I don't know if Eddie Howe had the same problem with Bournemouth or not, because the way he wants to play is so intense. I can imagine that might be part of the problem. But at the same time, the Premier League is pretty much now built on this high pressing, high intensity thing because of what Klopp and, to an extent, Guardiola, what they've done. And now everyone's kind of taking bits and bobs from those kind of influencers. Do you worry about that injury problem kind of happening again? Because I know Joe Willock's had problems, Joe Linton's had problems, obviously Isak's had problems but come back. Callum Wilson is a walk-in window, but when they're all fit, they're brilliant players on their days, and it must be frustrating that the depth's not quite there because you're not being able to strengthen, but also players just seem to keep getting injured and happens all the time. Do you think Eddie Howe's kind of learned from that a little bit, at least?
I think it's helped that they've brought in. So one of the first signings Paul Mitchell made was a guy called James Bunce, who's a performance director. Now, there's a big deal made of this. So there was a video on NUFC TV, and he was interviewed, and none of us have heard of this dude before, right? But I think the club were trying to say, look, we know that there were injuries last year, and this is the hire that we've brought in to try and reduce that. Howe has done nothing but heap him with praise since he's come in. He's at the training ground most days. He watches kind of the sessions. They do analysis of what comes out of it, and he helps in terms of managing the loads. So I'm less worried because I think the club have actively tried to do something about it. And it wasn't an issue in 22-23 when we didn't have the Champions League games on top.
Yeah.
We did have a cup run. Of course, got to the final of the League Cup that year, but we knocked out the third round of the FA Cup. So actually, in terms of the fixture congestion, it wasn't really there in the same way. And I think that definitely contributed. I think what's going to help us this year is the fact that, the teams that are likely, no offense, Adam, but the teams that are likely to finish in that top 5 are all in Europe. In some way, shape, or form. Now, I know Chelsea, of course, they've not even named Cole Palmer in their European squad, so they're a little bit different. But they're also a basket case of a club, and they're always 2 or 3 defeats away from utter what's the word I'm looking for? But just like utter chaos, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it all going wrong. But I think that's the difference, and I think we will see some impact there. But the difference between the Champions League group we had last year with AC Milan, Dortmund, and God, I've forgotten PSG. How could I forget PSG?
Yeah, great game that was.
But best night in my life was in James's Park, by an absolute mile. But how if you think about that group that we had 6 very intense games.
Yeah.
And the way that they've changed the format of it is, Villa have got at least 2 games where they're expected to win from that
Villa have
pot,
qualified in my eyes.
and
They've won the first 3
probably
games.
yeah. Well, they're top of the table, aren't they? So the way that the format's changed anyway, I think it's helped helped clubs a little bit from that point of view, apart from the fact they're going to have to play 2 extra games. And I think we're still yet to see if there's going to be a European impact for Villa. But that was the big thing that hit us last year was the fact that we just had all these games and then we had these injuries and then you're rushing players back too early and then they're getting injured again. And you're just in this mindless cycle. But there's been definite action taken to try and solve that issue. And, I look at the squad and I think, we don't have Sven Botman, who, is, probably, world-class central defender. And I think any side would want to fully fit Sven Botman. And we haven't got Callum Wilson. We haven't had Callum Wilson all year. But we somehow managed that, and actually having Asula there as an option, Gordon as an option through the middle as well, maybe Barnes through the middle you could potentially push as an option. There's definitely different things you can do, and I think that's the difference. Like we are seeing, there is a little bit more depth there. Like when you think about the way the midfield played on Saturday was excellent, and you couldn't put Sandro Tonali on the pitch.
Just to tangent off back to that new Champions League format, I do think it does benefit some teams who've now you can kind of rotate your squad, because like, what was it? Villa played Bayern Munich, obviously their biggest game, but then they've played like Young Boys and another team, I can't even remember who they played, but they could afford to rotate those 2 sides and they beat them comfortably, really, those other 2 teams. It was Bologna, wasn't it? Bologna and and Young Boys. So they can afford to kind of rotate. It kind of gives you a bit of an easier route to get in because you've got so many places to get in. But so I think Newcastle would have benefited playing in this new format for definite. But just going back to the league and so far the first 10 games, who's kind of been that talisman that you've had to rely on, or has there been any surprises for you so far this season?
I think there's 2 players who I'd call out and say they've been the most consistent, and that'd be Lewis Hall and Dan Burn. So 2 defenders, which tells you a lot about kind of how we've done as an attacking force this year. But I think Dan Burn has consistently played well, and I think what's helped him is that he's not playing left back; he's playing centre half. Lewis Hall's made that left back berth his own, as I said before. He's really kind of come on. In the first couple of games, I thought he looked a little bit defensively naive. But then as he's kind of, as the season's gone on, you can see that actually he's really kind of developed and pushed on. And you can see why we've spent like almost 30 million on him. And as I say, I can't see any way he doesn't start now for us. He's been that important. He's not the finished article yet. But I don't think he's far away from an England call-up. Left back's probably one of the spaces in the England side. When they're playing, or they were playing Kieran Trippier at left back during the Euros, because Luke Shaw's not fit. That just shows you like the lack of depth in that position. And I don't mean that in a way of, well, Lewis Hall only gets in that side because of a lack of depth. I mean, this kid is going to be England's left back for the next 10 years. He's that good. And Dan Burn, just no nonsense, gets in the way of anything that he can. But he's also very good on the ball. And I think, people forget actually, he played for a Brighton side that were very pass heavy and pass intensive. And he helps bring that little bit of quality, but also a bit of calm to that defense as well. So they'd be the 2 that I'd call out and say they've been the standout players for us so far this year.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth about Lewis Hall in England. I just think that kind of goes hand in hand. I thought Tyreek Mitchell should have definitely have gone last summer because he's a left back. Do you know what I mean? Just play someone that's left footed there. We've seen it when we've playing Olarena at left back, and even though he's brilliant on his left foot, it does upset the balance weirdly. Playing players out of position, slightly out of position anyway. But I think that kind of helps with Dan Burn because he played there for so long at left back. He can probably guide Lewis Hall a little bit, having played there and playing left centre half next to him. So that doesn't really surprise me that you kind of pick a duo out in terms of that kind of chemistry. Just to talk about Forest in a weird kind of way because we're in the upper echelons of this league. I don't know how, but I'm enjoying it.
Enjoy it and savor it.
How surprised have you been by Forest's start to the season?
I've been really surprised because, and I mean this in the nicest way, with all due respect, but you have seemed like a bit of a basket case the last couple of years. I think some of the transfer policy looks like it could have come out of Stamford Bridge, just with the high turnover of players and what have you. But we've got to sit here. We talk about transfer policy. Chris Wood. There are legitimately been people on #Newcastle on Twitter saying, and it's all hindsight, Adam. Let's be honest.
Yeah, of course
they were saying, well, why that January didn't we sell Callum Wilson and keep Chris Wood? Because look at him banging the goals in for Forest now. And I'm like, nobody would have made that decision.
No.
And but look, I'm really pleased for him. He did a really good job for us for that year. But there was, when you've got Isak on the side and Wilson on the side, he's not going to get much of an opportunity, and he wanted to play. And I think we got our money back for him, so that was really good business for us. And I think anybody looking back, you have to kind of look at these things almost like a cash out option. Like you've taken your money at that stage. Nobody thought Chris Wood would go on to do what he did, but also I think the way that you play, it obviously lends itself to the way that Chris Wood plays and gets the best out of him. Yeah. And of course, Elliot Anderson, who we all knew is talent. And it was sad to lose him. It was necessary, but it was sad. And again, apart from when he plays against us, I wish him all the best.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're completely right with how Chris Wood plays. I mean, he's 2 goals off being our all-time Premier League top goal scorer, because obviously we've not been in the Premier League very long, so it's not taking him long to get there. But yeah, he's just been.
Who is your record scorer?
Brian Roy with 24.
Oh, wow.
So
bloody hell.
yeah, a long time ago. But I mean, cracking player. I never got to really see him play because I was a bit too young back then. But yeah, cracking player. But yeah, Wood's just been on unbelievable form, and I know I'll probably wax lyrical about him on your guys' podcast, but bloody, I can't believe it. We all literally called him a donkey, and then 18 months later, we've people have put photoshops of him with the old Renault R9 haircut from the 2002 World Cup and all sorts. It's bonkers how well he's playing.
That game at St James's Park on Boxing Day as well, he was just unplayable that day. And part of it was because we were a defensive mess. But he looked, there was some of those goals which were prime Messi. They weren't Chris Wood goals. But fair play to him. He clearly didn't want to go. He wanted to stay, and I mean that again with the greatest respect to Forest. I think he left to play, but there was a part of him that felt like he could still stay and contribute. So look, I think fair play at the bloke. If you're able to go to go to your former club, score a hat trick, when you haven't kind of particularly done well for them, that hats off to you.
Is he the one that you kind of fear when you come into this game on Sunday, or are there any other players that you've kind of watched from Forest and gone, he could cause us some problems, or not really?
I think it depends how we play, right? It really does. I think if we turn up and play how we can play, I think we've got enough. But it is always that big what if, and Chris Wood's going to cause us some issues, but actually we've been very good at kind of restricting sides and restricting the chances and touches in the box, which is pretty much like a lot of Wood's game. There's decent height in the middle of that back four. Having said that, Dan Burn isn't the best header of the ball, despite the fact he's 9'6". Fabian Schär isn't really a brilliant header of the ball, which is one of the reasons why Dan Burn used to play at left back for us, because he used to have Botman and Schär, who weren't particularly good. Like, Botman's score all right in the air, but Schär isn't. So actually, Burn gave you that extra bit of height just to try and kind of. We used to kind of go to Trippier would push up high or go into the midfield, and then you'd almost play as a back three with Burn, Schär, and Botman. But anyway, you asked me a different question. So I think in terms of who I fear, I think what's happening is Morgan Gibbs-White is fit, isn't he? He is playing for you.
He started at the weekend and came off after an hour for Anderson, and Anderson immediately made an impact by winning a free kick and then getting an assist from a short free kick to Hudson-Odoi, put it in the corner.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be fearful of Anderson for obvious reasons, because he probably has a bit of a point to prove. from that point of view, I'd certainly be fearful of Gibbs White because, again, he caused us no end of nightmares on Boxing Day.
Yeah.
But he's a quality player as well. He's someone I'd love to have in our squad. You know, I really do think he's that good and he could really add something. But I'm less worried about the pace because we've got Hall on the left, we've got Livramento on the right, and I think that really has helped. The interesting thing will be whether we stick with Dan Burn. I think we probably do, or whether he plays Lloyd Kelly instead, just to kind of maybe give a little bit more pace at that left centre half position.
Yeah.
But no, the two I'd worry about probably say Anderson, Morgan, and Gibbs White.
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting battles across the whole of the pitch in this one, and Forest and Newcastle are no stranger to crazy games. I feel like the last couple of fixtures, I think you beat us 2-1 at the City Ground, 3-2 at the City Ground, where we probably should have had a penalty in another day, and then at St James's, you've beaten us and we've beaten you, and then the cup game earlier this season, we obviously lost on penalties, unfortunately. What would you expect Eddie Howe to stick with that same 11 that beat Arsenal?
Probably. That's a bit. It's a bit true to form to him that he will stick with the same 11 if it's worked.
Yeah.
He has done that before, but I think the chemistry is right across the side, and I think the difference is he's got he can make changes that'll make an impact as well. So he has got that depth, and I think the competition has really spurred players on to play better. And I think you see that Willock hadn't been great the last couple of cup games he'd played in, so I think Chelsea was a big chance for him because, you know, he knows that, you know, he's got Sandro, Bruno and Joe Linton were playing in that midfield three. And I think when Willock was then given the chance with Joe Linton playing ahead of him, I think that's given him the impetus and the, you know, say, right, actually, I'm going to take this place because it's here. And this is the thing now, if you know that you've got someone behind you, you know, who's going to be chomping at your feet. And I think that's the same with Livramento, you know, like Trippier's out at the minute, but he wants to keep that place when Trippier regains fitness, but he's got to earn it now. Like, look, he's in the shirt now. It's for him to keep, not for someone else to get off him. So having that across the field really helps. I think, you know, and I think Isak, I always say, looks so much better when Callum Wilson's fit. And I love Alexander Isak, but I tell you what, sometimes just knowing that you've got some, you know, a proven Premier League goal scorer sat on the bench behind you who could easily come in, and Howe's quite happy to start them as well on occasion, you know. So I think you've got to look at that and say, well, actually, competition breeds, and that's why we need to improve the depth. And the only way you can really improve depth, you can't bring someone in and say, do you want to be our reserve left winger? You know, you've got to bring someone in who feels like they can start. And I think, you know, if we do a bit of that in January, then, you know, we've got a real chance of kicking on and finishing in a European position.
Yeah. Just for our listeners, John, could you give us that 11 that probably start against Arsenal for maybe those that didn't watch Match of the Day or kind of
of course. Yeah, so Pope in goal. It'll be back four of Hall, Burn, Cher, and Livramento. Midfield three of Willock, Bruno, and Sean Longstaff, and then a front three of Joe Linton, Isak, and Gordon. So Gordon playing on the right hand side.
Yeah, I mean, brilliant battles all the way across, and I'm really looking forward to it. I know Newcastle's away form hasn't been brilliant, but obviously City Ground's been quite a decent place for you to come, so that's always in the back of our minds and past games. But what are you expecting from the game, and then what's your score prediction, should I say?
I think we've got the capability to turn up. I really hope we do. I think our away form's always been questionable, but I think our performances have been much better. Chelsea wasn't as good as where we have been more recently. So I think if we turn up and play the way that we did against Everton, and I know we drew that game 0-0, it's about how we take our chances. Isak's got that confidence back again. And, you know, I mean, I still think about that 2-1 game with that ridiculous goal he scored when he was like leading one way and stretched his right leg the other and put it in that far post. But I do fancy us to edge it 2-1. I think it's going to be a really difficult game because, you know, you guys have shown that, you know, you're up. You don't end up that end of the table after 10 games by fluke. You don't. You've been playing well. You've been getting results. You went to Anfield and won, for God's sake. Like not many teams can do that. I mean, Brighton gave it a good fist on Saturday, but really, Liverpool just had that little bit of quality, whereas you managed to keep them out. So, I think from that point of view, it's going to be a really tough game. And I would still say that if we end up getting a draw out of it, that's a decent result. A good result for us would be to win, so then actually we can pull in someone from that pack again and do that, because actually that's the one thing, like we've probably derailed Arsenal's title race for the second year in a row in November. But actually it's about, let's go into the international break on a high. Let's get that 3 points. I'm sure we can. And then we've got West Ham at home on the Monday night, which means
you'll
Howe's
hammer
gonna have a
them.
little bit longer with the players. Well, great joke. Yeah, I would hope so. I think. Look, and that's it. If we turn up on, and Howe's had a couple of days as well. Every extra day on the training ground is a gift. So the fact that we've got the Monday night game, I'm really pleased about that, because it just gives them, after they come back, it's always the thing. Oh, well, they've been away on international duty and really tired and all. And it's like, well, actually, if you've got an extra day or two on the training ground with them, then you'll be able to get a bit more out of them.
I heard that off a Liverpool fan when we beat him. Oh, McAllister's been to Argentina. I was like, Chris Wood's been to bleeding New Zealand and back. What's your point? It's like, but yeah, no, I think even if we beat you 5-0, John, which I don't think will happen, but you'll beat West Ham, because they are terrible, honestly. Terrible football team under Lopetegui. But I digress. Thank you very much for coming on, John. Obviously, if people want to hear the Newcastle side of things, True Faith Podcast Newcastle, is that on Spotify, YouTube, everywhere?
Yeah, Spotify, YouTube. If Newcastle fans have sneaked in to listen to this, we also have a Patreon channel, which is up to £8 a month, but that's for basically a podcast a day around all things Newcastle, previews, instant reaction, all of this kind of thing. So, and then some stuff from journos as well. So, and ex-players. So a lot of really good content. But, if not, if you're just a casual listener as well, we'd love to have you either YouTube or on Spotify as well.
Bro, thank you very much, John. And until next time, when we obviously come back to review the Newcastle game, come on, you Reds.